Hey, it's Russ and Lauren. This is our usual weekly music discussion video on the Infectious Groove Music channel here on YouTube. And this is part of a series that we've been doing that I think is just fun to point out certain things about different eras and albums and, I don't know, band members and everything. So it's the What's So Great About series. And for me, the decade of the 80s, I think gets celebrated to a certain extent, but I also think has a lot that people pick on for no reason.
Sure.
Yeah. So I thought it was time to discuss what's so great about 80s music in its entirety. And for me, I think one of the things that I think the 80s gets like a misconception about is that 80s music is that it was like all fun and games, right?
Right.
Which for a lot of the disco that like was rounding out the 70s that kicked off the early and yacht rock, which you love, and hair metal, which I love, and a lot of the birth of rap, there's a lot of fun stuff going on there. Like the first Beastie Boys record is like the whole thing is a party, you know? But I'm not just talking about like Live Aid and We Are the World when I say that there was some serious stuff. I mean like well before everybody else caught on to quote unquote alternative music in the early 90s, Depeche Mode, REM,
Yeah.
The Cure, the Smiths, OMD. Like there were so many bands who were like really, really, really pushing like so. Even like if you think about like early U2 from like 84 to 87.
That's my favorite U2.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But like they're, to me, it's such a diverse, and we're going to get into more diversity later, but it's such a diverse decade for that, where like people from the outside looking in can go, oh yeah, well, it's all hair metal and whatever. You know, there's so much more going on that you don't realize at first. I think for the most part, so much 80s music has aged well.
Yeah, and yes. Yes, and I think part of the reason why it feels like it's aged so well is one, because it has, but two, because we right now in this moment culturally are very deep in like a 80s nostalgia phase.
Sure.
Right? So even a lot of stuff that's happening currently, whether they will admit it or not, draws on a lot of stuff that happened in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, no, you were influenced by this stuff, which means when you go back and listen to stuff from the 80s, it's going to still sound relevant because it's kind of still in what's happening now.
No, in song styles and what we just touched on a little bit with like lyrics and whatnot and the more serious stuff. But I think too, production wise, like, you know, is there stuff that sounds exactly like it was produced in 81, 2, 3, or 4? Yeah. But then there's stuff like Everybody Wants to Rule the World that I think you could release to radio today and no one would know that it was mastered 35, 40 years ago.
Sure. That's me.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Purple Rain is the sound of Minneapolis, but the production on it, you could release most of those tracks today and people would think that Prince was still here making new music. You know what I mean? And then that's Thriller and Bad. You know, the production on either of those records is gross. Like it's just so impressive. Golden age of soundtracks.
True.
Don't even come at me about the 90s. Like, yeah, you got your Crow and Pulp Fiction and Dazed and Confused. Okay. Footloose, Top Gun, the Chariots of Fire soundtrack.
Dirty Dancing.
Dirty Dancing. I mean, it's just The Breakfast Club. What's the movie I'm thinking of that all the people get together and it's a bunch of college students and they're all upset over the it was a huge soundtrack. I can't believe that I can't think of it right now. And there's a joke about it in I'm sure people watching this video are like, oh my God, you know what you're trying to say. It's a bunch of oldies and whatnot on it, but I don't know why I can't think of The Big Chill. Good Lord, finally. The Big Chill. Cocktail. Like it just, the list goes on and on and on. Like this was a decade where, and this happened in the 90s too, but soundtracks weren't given throwaway songs. They weren't given songs that didn't matter. Like these were all, there was a lot of soundtracks in the 80s that had the phrase, instead of just saying music from the motion picture, it would say like from and inspired by, you know?
Yeah. Stevie Nicks did a lot of inspired by songs on a lot, because she has a track on Fast Times at Ridgemont High, she's, you know, and stuff like that.
Which I would argue is a crazy underrated track on that. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, by the way. Another ridiculous soundtrack.
Against All Odds.
Against All Odds. Prince had 4 movie soundtracks in the 90s or in the 80s. Purple Rain, Parade, which many people forget is the soundtrack for Around the World, or I'm sorry, Around the World in a Day, Under the Cherry Moon, Graffiti Bridge, which is not a great movie, but fantastic soundtrack. The Batman soundtrack. You know, dude did 4 soundtracks in the 80s. So soundtracks, come at me. Like
That's true.
I hear your 80s argument or your 90s argument for soundtracks, but like I can't hear it over all of the ridiculously good soundtracks. Birth of Rap. Now, yes, rap music goes way back before the 80s, but when I say birth, I mean the full on, like much like I said about like alternative music was around well before everyone else discovered it in 1991. But like white people were going into Kmart in the 90s to buy rap music. That to me is the birth of rap
That's
music,
fair.
you know, and quickly escalated from, and I've played for you stuff like LL Cool J and the earlier Run DMC tracks when it was all about like, I'm a better MC than you. And then it quickly escalates to like 88 and 87 or 87 and 88 with Public Enemy and NWA and these acts that are like, oh no, we're going to take this to a whole different, that quick, you know, stunning. And then other genres I think too came into their own, like, you know, you think about bands like Pink Floyd and the Grateful Dead who had huge hits, Fleetwood Mac, huge careers prior, but were able to adapt to what was going on in the 80s. Like Learning to Fly is one of Pink Floyd's biggest hits. Touch of Grey. Many people, that's the only Grateful Dead song they know. They don't know about Casey Jones or Truckin' or any of that. Fleetwood Mac, how many people probably heard Little Lies well before they heard anything before that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Heart.
Heart. Yeah. There's so many different genres that came into their own in the 80s. It's insane. And then the last one, diversity. Now, I don't mean, you and I were just talking about this with someone yesterday in public about how Michael Jackson is the reason why they started playing people of color on MTV. But that's not the angle I'm going after. I'm going after, and after you watch this video, do this. Google the top 10 songs for any single year in the 80s and be jealous that that's what I listen to on the radio.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the top 10 in any given year was this soft rock hit, followed by this rap hit, followed by this punk song, followed by this Jim Steinman ballad, which I've lamented a lot in the car, followed by this B-52 song. You know what I mean? And yes, we went through phases where like in the mid 80s, like a lot of rap started to invade the top 10 charts and whatever. And then at the end of the 80s, like a lot of hair metal started invading the charts. But like the diversity was always still there. Like those things were always sitting on the chart next to Madonna, Cyndi Lauper, and Prince, you know, or MJ, or Hall & Oates doing Philly style soul through the whole 80s, while Dire Straits is rocking hard with Money for Nothing, and Springsteen's releasing the hardest rock hits he's had. You know what I mean? You can't beat the decade for that.
It's true.
It just, to me, there's no one sound of the 80s.
No, I think a lot of times when people think of the 80s, like for me, if you were to say 80s music, my brain would go synth.
Sure.
Right?
But that's
my brain. Other people's brains are going to go different places.
The first thing I think of when I think the 80s is, White Snake, Poison.
There you go again.
But then it's ridiculous. Then I'm like, oh, but MJ and Prince, and you know what I mean? It's crazy. It's it's the definition of the phrase embarrassment of riches.
Yes.
In my opinion. So we love this series. What's so great about, and we love to share like what we think is so great. This is not far from the last time we're going to touch on the 80s. So we will be continuing on with years and groups and whatnot. So if you have a year or a group or a band member or an album or a single you would like us to talk about, like for sure, we're going to have a What's So Great About Easy Lover video at one point, because what a great song.
Two fills.
Yeah, I know. Two fills. Amazing. But my name is Russ. That is Lauren. If you've tuned in today, we thank you so much for your time. What matters to us more than anything on this channel is you and your opinion on things. So tell us what you think is so great about the 80s below any of the points that we made. If you are embarrassed as I am, it took me so long to come up with a big chill, leave a comment. Let me know about that. Drop a like on the video. And as we always say, thank you so much for watching.